Good morning. I have the privilege of sitting down with Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds, President and CEO of Family and Children's Association, Executive Director of Long Island's Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. Before joining the LICADD, he worked for Long Island's Association for AIDS Care for 19 years. He served on New York's Heroin and Opiate Task Force. Dr. Reynolds has served as a consult and grant reviewer for the Federal Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. Dr. Reynolds earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Dowling College, a master's in public administration from LIU, and a doctorate from Stony Brook University of Social Warfare. Dr. Reynolds is a lifetime Long Island resident and a two-time cancer survivor, an accomplished marathon runner, and an Ironman triathlete. His book, Every Mile Matters, turning triathlon training into cancer triumph. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Will. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. It's such a resilient man, and actually the mental fortitude, how you kept pushing forward when you have had so many different barriers in your life. And I'm just very curious about how that has impacted your mental health, and also how can you be able to share your story to inspire others to be able to keep persevering.
Yeah, look, so, you noted in the intro that I've spent like 30 plus years in health and human services, helping other people and in some cases walking beside them in what I think are their darkest moments. And in retrospect, they would probably say they're their darkest moments. For me, that implies a certain level of trust, right? That's a form of connection that we don't necessarily see that often in modern society. And I know that when people reach out to a not-for-profit organization like the one I run, they're pretty much at the end of their rope. They've tried everything else. They've tried to fix it on their own. They've maybe, picked up the phone 5 or 6 times before they finally follow through and say, I need help. And so I take that sacred trust very, very, very seriously. When I got two successive cancer diagnoses, I kind of went from like the helper to the guy that needed help. Really uncomfortable position to be in. Generally for 35 years, I've been the guy that, has all the answers, right? Your marriage implodes at 2 a.m., you call me. Your teenager overdoses on fentanyl. At 6 a.m., you call me, and I have a good drug treatment kind of, placement for you. And so I've been that guy, the one with all the answers. And then suddenly I was thrown into this world where I didn't have all the answers and I needed to rely on other people, my healthcare team, um, and the people around me to kind of get through the cancer diagnosis. You mentioned the parallel with triathlons, and my book, Every Mile Matters, really is about that. And so, fast forward to that story, it's, April Fool's Day. I'm on my way to a dental appointment. My phone lights up with a notification from to log into my healthcare portal. I get to a red light. I quickly do that with my thumb while I'm keeping an eye on the light. And I scroll through pages of medical jargon to find the punchline. And the punchline is clinically significant prostate cancer likely. I'm thrown into a spin because I'm like, I only went for a routine checkup. I have no symptoms. I'm a young guy. I had just completed Ironman Florida. And for your audience that doesn't necessarily know what that is or thinks Ironman is a comic book character, the reality is, Ironman is a 2.4 mile swim, a 112 mile bike ride, and a full 26.2 mile marathon. If it takes you any longer than 16 hours and 59 minutes to do all those things, you are disqualified. And so it's a pretty intense day out there. But when I got the diagnosis, I'm like, what am I going to do? And then I harken back and I'm like, look, 5 months ago, I did Ironman Florida. I could do this. I do hard things. And I did Ironman Florida, it turns out, with cancer. So I got through that initial diagnosis kind of using the test of Ironman and the grit, the determination, the fortitude, all those things you build up in endurance sports to get me through that diagnosis. I was treated in July of that year. I had surgery. I was out again doing my thing. In fact, I ran the New York City Marathon 5 months after I had the surgery. By no means was it my fastest time, but I got it done. And it was like, I'm back. Like I did this. I'm through this phase in my life and I'm in a good place. By then I had become an evangelist for routine screenings. And so like everyone over the age of 45 should do. I went and got a colonoscopy. Again, no symptoms. I'm just doing this because I need to get checked out. And, just when I thought everything was good, I was diagnosed with stage 3B colorectal cancer. And so 2 cancers in 2 years, this one much more serious than the first. Talk about a tailspin, but again, I was able to draw on, some of the work that I'd done in the past with other people who had overcome significant challenges, my experience as an endurance athlete, getting through the first cancer diagnosis and now into the second. And so it almost for me, and I think most people look at it this way, the things you overcome become those building blocks for taking on even harder things. And as I navigated the cancer journey, there were mornings where I woke up and felt nauseous. And, I thought back, quite frankly, and not to get too graphic with folks, but, I've done 15 marathons, I've done lots of triathlons. You throw up during these races.
Hmm.
And you don't throw up and stop and go into the medical tent or call it a day. You throw up and you wipe your face off and you keep going. It's actually not a thing. And so, I felt nauseous during chemo. I'm like, you know what? Wipe your face off and get your butt to work. Go do what you do best. And, that mindset isn't for everybody. And there's a downside to that mindset. But it did give me kind of the tools I needed to get through the journey in my particular way.
Jeff, you just talked about a yo-yo of emotions, pretty much a slinky of it, just up and down, where you're just able to keep going. How did you learn to be that gritty?
I think it just came over time. And I think, with each challenge that we get in life, I think starting from birth, right? Each challenge that you get in life that you're able to overcome, is a building block for the rest of those things. I took up triathlon in my mid 40s. I was not a student athlete. In fact, I was thrown off the track team in ninth grade for getting the other kids to smoke cigarettes. And so, I was out with a bunch of people at a professional conference. It's 2 a.m. doing what people do at 2 a.m. at professional conferences. And they're like, hey, you want to do a 5K in the morning? And I'm like in like 4 hours from now? Sure, why not? What could go wrong with that? So, we all did a 5K. I was not so happy with my time. The way I do things is, I did that 5K, immediately went back to my hotel room and started registering for 5Ks so that maybe I could get better at doing it. My time was 36 minutes, and I'm like, all right, so I'm out of shape. I don't really want to be out of shape. And then 5Ks became 10Ks, became half marathons, became full marathons. And then, I wasn't happy being mediocre at one sport. I needed to be mediocre at three sports. And so I took up, triathlon really, I think, as part of a midlife crisis. But it was like each challenge became, all right, so can I go the next step and do this? Can I go the next step and do this? I didn't know that all of that was preparing me for 2 bouts of cancer. I just thought, well, this is fun. I'm kind of good at it. I get through it. It gives me kind of the mental space to decompress from the end of the day. I had no idea that it was gearing me up for these challenges. Just a word on that mental space. The most important thing I do, and I generally do, 12, 14, 16-hour days, right? It's just they're long days and that kind of thing. With the book out, the days have gotten even longer. One of the things about endurance sports, and I I exercise every day, usually pretty assertively, usually two sports a day. So today I will run and swim. I'll have an hour in the water, open water. I live on Long Island, where there's no headphones, there's no music, there's nobody talking to you. I will be in the water away from everybody and everything and only with myself for an hour. We don't get a lot of chances to do that in life. And being with yourself, almost in like an isolation tank, it feels like for an hour allows you to think through things, allows you to process things, allows you to face things in a way that we don't often find time to in very busy days. I also, when I run, I tend not to run with music. I just want to listen to my breath. I want to listen to the sounds around me. Really gives me the opportunity to think through things, to decompress. Some people choose meditation and yoga. I am way too type A and hyper for that. And so for me, it really is that time outdoors, that time in isolation, even if in the winter, if it's indoors, although I try to run outside almost all the time. But even, an hour on a treadmill, the kind of repetitive footsteps, puts you into a meditative state where you're able to process things and think things through. And so, if there's anything I would, so in doing this, I learned there's a key difference between health and fitness, right? I was fit, but with two cancers, I wasn't necessarily healthy. But the endurance I had built up was like money in the bank. It was money in the bank emotionally, psychologically. It was money in the bank physically. I'm part of a clinical trial that involves heavy, heavy dose chemo. And so I went for 27 rounds of radiation, 27 rounds of chemo, took a month off from treatment, and then had chemo infusions over the course of 6 months. And literally, my oncologist said to me, "We're giving you as much chemo as a human being can withstand." And my attitude was, bring it. I'm in great shape to be able to do this emotionally and physically. And so, there are people who are like, yeah, kind of there's the old joke about the marathon runner who dies of a heart attack. Like, aren't you an Ironman or something? How'd you get cancer twice? Well, health and fitness are different, but being in pretty good shape emotionally and physically created treatment options for me that other people may not have had and helped me get through this. And so I say to people, you may not have cancer now, but find some form of exercise that works for you. It doesn't have to be doing triathlons. It doesn't have to be running or cycling or swimming or any of that, but find a way to carve out the time and space to do that personal reflection, to move your body a little bit in a way that's comfortable and sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. um, and that for me is the pathway forward. One of the things I love about endurance sports is it taught me how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's no mincing words. You do an Ironman, there's a lot of dark, uncomfortable moments. It's a constant struggle where your legs are saying, stop, you don't have to do this. This is voluntary. And your mind saying, yeah, but if I quit, that lasts forever. Like this feeling of pain is a temporary thing. If you quit, that lasts forever. And so, hang in there. And that served me well um, during my treatment. And so, mile 18 of a marathon is one of the ugliest places I've been. It's a rough spot, but you focus and you get through it and you realize, well, this isn't going to last forever. I'm not going to die doing this. The pain isn't going to last forever. And you find a way to just sit with it and move through it in a way where you're not necessarily stomping through the pain. You're not dwelling on every moment. You kind of like glide through it. And I use some of those metaphors and some of those tactics and techniques for getting through my cancer treatment. Your sound went off. Well, you're back.
Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now. Yep, now you're gone again.
1 second. Yep, yep. No. What a lot of people do not realize about the Ironman training of how many hours a week, days, and months prior to actually completing one of those. I've only ran a marathon in my life. I rocked a marathon with a 45-pound pack. I've never done an Ironman. I sink when I hit the water. I tried to do a triathlon, a mini triathlon, and I couldn't do the point 0.6 mile swim. So that's heavily impressive. On top of all the other work between family and being like a person of your magnitude, That's really, really impressive. And honestly, I appreciate the fact that you're talking about this, about the resiliency factor. I keep thinking about Carol Dweck, the book Mindset. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And the more that you are willing to grow, the more that you're willing to be resilient, the further you are able to grow. Like if you're willing to fail and keep failing over and over again and going forward, you'll go much further in life than a person that has a lot more skills than you, but they have a fixed mindset. They stay inside that comfortable zone. They'd rather be a big fish in a small pond than actually a small fish in a huge lake. And the huge lake gives you the opportunity to grow. I was curious about what got you into the alcohol and drug dependence. That is a huge proponent of what you have done for the last 30 plus years.
Yeah. So, I've always been in the helping field. And I think sometimes people with social work degrees will say, well, I just kind of fell into this work, or I'm a people person, that kind of thing. The reality is, if you go into social work, it's certainly not for the money, it's not for the fame and fortune, that kind of thing. And so, I am fortunate at Family and Children's Association to have a staff of 360 people, really dedicated folks. 80% are women. And I always say to people, like, we don't need to necessarily know your story unless you want to share it. But, I have a theory about this in that if you enter the social work field, it's for one of a couple of reasons. One is, as a kid, you needed help and you got it and you want to pay it forward. You needed help and you didn't get it, and you want to make sure that other young people do, or you didn't need any help and you're grateful for that, but you see needs in the community around you and you want to make a difference. And for some of us, it's all of those things. And in my case, it is all of those things. I worked in HIV early on in my career, largely because I saw an entire generation of young gay men dying while nobody did anything about it. It took then President Ronald Reagan 60,000 AIDS deaths before he said the word in public. I watched injection drug users in my community, largely men of color, dying at epic rates and nobody really doing anything to make treatment more accessible for them. And so for me, it was, this is a stark injustice. And people said to me, well, if you're not an injection drug user and you're not a gay man, why would you get involved in this? Well, because what's happening is unacceptable. It's wrong. And I feel like I got to say something, and not only say something, but do something about it. Fast forward a little bit, my mother struggled with chronic alcoholism. She eventually died of that disease. Um, it's an area where I felt like I could make a difference. And one of the things that we don't talk enough about are the kids and families who are impacted by addiction. We don't focus enough on the people who are struggling and getting them to care, but we also don't spend enough time focusing on the impact of untreated addiction on the people that are in the circle. And lots of those folks go untreated for an extended period of time, and it goes on to impact their relationships and the rest of their life. And they don't, I think in most cases, people don't really understand why, right? So, the other person was the one with the problem. Why is it I have to go to treatment? Are you kidding me? My life has been inconvenienced enough. And so, um, I jumped into that space and spent a lot of years doing that. I did a lot around the opioid crisis, and we're now in another phase of that opioid crisis where fentanyl is beginning to drop down, and we're starting to see a turn in the overdose rates and that kind of thing, and all of that is awesome. I think we've done a better job of making sure that treatment is available for folks who need it, but we still have a long way to go, and I worry incessantly that some of the moves in Washington, D.C. lately will set back our efforts. And so I worry a lot about that. The fight against fentanyl doesn't stop at the national border. We've got to make sure that we're doing prevention in schools, that we're making sure that treatment is available, particularly treatment that's trauma informed. And we've got to support people in recovery. As much as we talk about fentanyl, and look, I've been to my fair share of funerals and held the hands of parents who have lost their kids. alcohol still kills more people than fentanyl does, and it's socially acceptable. And so, we're all focused on fentanyl and chasing the drug du jour. We sometimes miss the old standby of alcohol, which is at this point killing more Americans than fentanyl is. And so, in all of those things, I think our approach to drug education has been very, very, very misguided, and that our approach to preventing substance use in kids really is to put 1,000 kids in an auditorium, bring in somebody like me with a charge to scare the heck out of them so they don't smoke weed and drink booze at an early age. And I've got 45 minutes to scare them. And can I scare them? Yep, I can scare them. I can kind of paint a picture of their parents standing over their casket in the event that things go wrong. But that's not real education. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because when you go in and do that, particularly you go in and do it in high schools and say, okay, kids, don't do drugs. The reality is 80% of them have. And about 60% of them are doing it regularly. And they're not doing it regularly because that age old thing that they're bored or they're hanging out with the wrong crowd. In most cases, that's not true. They're doing it because they have anxiety, they have depression, they have insomnia. And those are the kids who use cannabis, who try booze, who try something else and say, wow, for the first time in my life, I feel normal. I don't feel high. I feel normal. I feel like I fit in better. I feel less anxious. I feel less depressed. I'm able to sleep better. And then people like me that do drug education are on the other side of the equation trying to wrestle not a joint or a beer away from that kid. We're wrestling with their normalcy. And there is zero chance we're going to win that tug of war, because there's nothing we want more than to feel normal, both as kids and as adults. And so I've tried to change up kind of the way we do prevention education to say, stop the scare tactics, stop suggesting that if a kid drinks a beer today, they're going to have a needle in their arm tomorrow, because they won't. And let's dive deeper and focus on the mental health challenges that impact kids as opposed to lecturing to them. Let's try to understand. And, let's not start this when the kids are 13, 14, and 15. We should have a discussion about coping mechanisms and how to identify feelings and how to build a support system with kids when they're in kindergarten. I'm not going to go talk to a first grader about heroin, but I do want to talk to them about how do you name your feelings? And if you're feeling anxious or depressed or sad or mad or glad, what do you do to channel that in the right way? And so, I've long advocated for a much more comprehensive approach to drug education. I'm not sure we're there yet, but all the things that I think we've been told about drug education are patently false. How do I know that? First, because I talk to a lot of kids. Secondly, what we're doing isn't working. We have not been able, over the course of 100 years, including the so-called war on drugs, to bring down the level of drug use in America. And I'm not sure that we're on the cusp of being able to do that anytime soon. What does get us closer, I think, is a more robust discussion that's less preachy about mental health, and less preaching and finger wagging, and more understanding will go a long way.
So the journey that I'm on right now, I'm getting my master's in social work, hopefully starting in January for Simmons University. And you are 100% correct when you're talking about it's more than just, hey, I'm bored. There is something that they're trying to hide or distract from. There's something else that's underlining where a lot of times we don't meet the people where they're at in life. We don't meet them, hey, you know what? You're not being seen by your parents. You're not actually learning how to be resilient. I think about the marshmallow test while you're talking about this. How to delay your gratification, how you delay your id, or acceptance commitment theory about how can you be able to sit in those discomforting thoughts. We have actually became more and more of a hyper sensitive situation where if you are bored, here's your phone. If you are tired, here's a pill. Oh, if you want to, like, if you're tired, here's some caffeine. And we just don't want to allow people to sit in that discomfort, that area of suffering, so they can grow, that they can change, and they can be able to have that ability. And So when you were actually talking about this, I was nodding my head to it because I'm like, we're trying to treat the symptoms. We're not trying to treat the causality of it, and we're not trying to meet the people and change the society long term. We're trying to have this heavy influence just on this critical moment. But this is why I started up this men's mental health podcast because of the generational trauma of how our fathers were. I'm not saying your father, but I know how my father was. He didn't have the luxury of being able to get help, nor was my grandfather, my great grandfather. And I would love to see people be able to sit in that discomforting, that type of emotion, to be able to identify their emotions, especially a lot of the guys I've talked to are former veterans. And it's just easy to say, push our emotions to the side. And we just got to keep trucking until all of a sudden alcohol is eating up at us. Oh, I have an alcohol problem. No, you have a mental illness right now. You're having a co occurrence problem. Your alcohol was serving you until it didn't serve you any longer. Hey, you're doing heroin, you're doing methamphetamines. That is awesome. Let's actually have a conversation. Let's try to get you health, like, let's get you clean, let's get you sober. Now let's actually start working on your mental health. And there's another part that I really want to touch on, the Al-Anon part, the families that are really hit heavily. One of the things I've learned in my own past, people that are mentally ill or people that not being able to handle their own problems or being able to have assistance from therapists, they become very radioactive to their family and their friends. And we create this whole divide until the fact that we don't know how to talk to each other, and then we pull away, and then another steeper hill comes in. So I think I believe what you're saying is 100% true, and I so appreciate it. Not enough people are actually willing to be able to say, "It's not the alcohol, it's not this, it's this."
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Al-Anon, and there's a set of traditions with Al-Anon. And I will say this: if you read the book, one of the things I say in the preface is, read through the book, take what you need, and leave the rest, kind of thing. And so I'm pretty familiar with the 12-step model. You know, I think families, particularly if someone is involved in chaotic drug use, the families around them tend to adapt to those behaviors. And we talk a lot about folks getting into treatment as an ideal. It's not for everybody, but families sometimes need as much support because they've adapted their behaviors to the chaos that's associated with frequent and heavy drug use. And so I say to families, this is a family disease. It impacts all of us in very specific ways that sometimes only play out later in life. You mentioned, men's willingness to open up and talk about things. In the book, I talk about how cancer changed my relationships, and I think you'll appreciate this. One of the things I noticed as I went through treatment is, I have a close circle of guy friends, most of whom I've known for many, many years, sometimes some of them in excess of 35 years. And I noticed that after my second diagnosis, which again was more serious than the first, a lot of my guy friends would say to me, we'd have lunch, we'd go to leave, and they'd say, "I love you." And the first couple times I was riled by it. I'm like, I didn't know what to say. And, we've all been in those, alcohol impaired backslapping moments with, "I love you, man," kind of. It was not that. It was not that. And the first couple times I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. I'm like, oh, okay, good. I'll see you soon. And so it was eye-opening for me because I considered myself to be pretty progressive. Certainly I worked in AIDS for 20 years, so not homophobic. Um, and able to form relationships pretty easy, but this riled me. My first thought really was, am I sicker than I think? Do they think I'm going to die? Like, this is our last lunch together and they think I'm going to check out? And I'm like, well, no, because they keep telling me how good I look and my blood counts aren't terrible. And so maybe it's not that. And I really wrestled with it for a long time in terms of coming to some resolution. And over time, I was able to, begin to express that love and affection back to my guy friends. I also thought back and I'm like, geez, I've said I love you to God knows how many women when I didn't even really mean it. Why is this so darn hard? Um, and it was, and it's still not easy. A friend of mine read the book, a week or so ago, called me on a Saturday and said, I just want to tell you, I just finished it. I loved it. It was awesome. And I'm going to take a chapter from the book and tell you that I love you. And I handled the conversation okay, but I will say, I had like that immediate thing, and I'm like, oh, here's this thing again. As I think back, and I wrote this in the book, I can't. He probably did, but I don't ever remember a time when my father said to me, "I love you." And again, he probably did, but I don't remember it, and he's still alive. Same thing with my brother and I. Like, we don't say that to each other. I think we have a close relationship, but we don't say that to each other. I say that to my wife every single time I talk to her. I say that to my 14-year-old son every time we hang up the phone, or every time I talk to him every night before we go to bed. So I don't know if it's a generational thing or what it is, but men expressing love and affection to each other is something that even I think I'm pretty progressive. Even I struggle with. And I'm like, so if I struggle with this and consider myself to be pretty progressive and open, and in touch with my feelings, I can only imagine how hard it is for other men to be able to have those conversations.
So, Jeff, I will say, like, I got a little bit of chills while you were talking about this, and I'm gonna share this part. So, I didn't own a firearm from 21 up until probably several months ago, and I didn't trust myself with a firearm for my own mental reasons. And I live over in Montana, which is between one, two, and three highest rates of suicide for the last decade, and it has over a 10% population of veterans. But I have a group of guys that I can actually call up. I became very vulnerable with that I'm able to have these type of dialogues. And until I made those relationships with those men, I did not trust myself with a firearm because we had this type of relationship where we can say, "Hey, I'm not right. Can you hold on to this? Okay, I'm feeling right. Can I have it back?" And it's that trust between each other. And I have a few guys that we will grab each other, we give each other a handshake, come in, and we say, "I love you" in their ear. And we actually mean it. It's like that brotherly love. It's like that, "Hey, I got you. Let me know when you're hurting." Or we'll send a chat, like a text in a group chat saying, "Hey, just thinking about you." But saying I love you was so difficult when you actually really meant it to another person that is a friend of yours that really cares about you, that sees the vulnerability in you and sees the courage of what you're having, and you see that vulnerability and courage in them. We don't always actually open up like this, but when we do, we're actually able to build a tighter knit community. This is my beliefs. And when we're able to say I love you, another phrase that gets me, you're enough, or you matter. Like, as men, a lot of times, and especially boys and men, we were looking for these accolades from our fathers, from our coaches, from our teachers, but we didn't really get these accolades. So now when we're seen like, holy shit, this feels awkward. This feels uncomfortable. This feels unfamiliar. Like, are you this? And you're trying to push away instead of actually being like, thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for seeing me that I'm struggling. Thank you for having lunch with me and knowing that I'm in rough shape. Thank you for understanding that you're one of my pillars and being able to say I love you means a lot to me. And it really does touch the soul because the way that you were expressing it, you're able to show how like your generation, but you making sure that you're passing it to your kids. And then being able to hear it back from other men that you respect. I assume that you really respect these men that are actually saying it to you.
Yeah.
It just it hits home. And the the area of because I work in more heavily in the suicide prevention field, and to help people not complete, how it's more of community. And to be more community, you have to be vulnerable. You can't have a community and not be vulnerable. And saying I love you, it's like, whew, it's one of the heaviest things that you could say to another person, especially in our English language.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also learned that, sometimes people offer help And it's not about you, it's about them getting some self-efficacy over the situation and deepening the relationship. So one of those friends that I referred to earlier said to me, if you ever need a ride to chemo, I'm happy to just come and drive you there and sit there with you. You'll never take me up on that, but the offer is there. And it struck me because I wasn't going to take him up on it. I didn't take him up on it. But one of the things I realized was that he needed that as much as I did. So I found other ways to let him in. But sometimes when somebody offers to help, it's not about you, it's about them and their need to kind of be involved and to help, and your relationship and your willingness to deepen that relationship going forward. you know I dealt with two of the most embarrassing cancers you can get, right? So I affectionately used to call them, I mean, and they're not this, but I called them my dick and ass cancers, right? And so, and there's technical names and that kind of thing. And I've got a doctorate, so I'm not supposed to speak like that. But I will say, a lot of men who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer, have approached me and said, this feels like a loss of masculinity. Like, so, like, what's the deal? And I'm able to dissect and say, well, is the loss of masculinity side effects? Because sometimes you have side effects, sometimes you have none. I was very fortunate to have none whatsoever. But even if you do have significant side effects, and many men do, let's talk about how we define masculinity and over time, right? The way I define masculinity, and I think most people do, is very different from how I defined it when I was 19 or 20 versus how I define it now at the age of 58, right? When you're 19 or 20, it's all about sex. It's all about, who can I conquer and that kind of thing, leaving wreckage behind us sometimes for generations to come. But as you mature, it takes on a different tone. And one of the things I found with prostate cancer survivors, especially those who struggle with incontinence, and other issues, impotency, that kind of thing. So many men have said, I was able to reclaim my masculinity by helping other people and deepening my relationships. One of the things about any kind of cancer is if you are in a relationship, whether it's an opposite sex marriage, a same sex marriage, or a same sex relationship, the reality is if your relationship wasn't good prior, cancer isn't going to help it. It probably is not. And because it takes its toll. If you go into it strong, though, and you do it together, it's a bond that's inseparable over time. And so many men that I know fall on one side of the equation or the other. Either their marriage completely fell apart because of a lack of intimacy, because of a lack of communication. But an equal number of men said, no, my relationship actually deepened because I could be a lot more vulnerable. I could talk about what was going on. We found other ways to connect, which I think naturally happens as people age. But it accelerated that process. And so even things that can have a dramatic impact on our lives and our relationships, if you play them the right way, can actually turn into profound strengths. But you have to be mindful and you have to do the work. If you just kind of say, yeah, I got a prostate cancer diagnosis, it's all going to work out, it's all going to be fine, that's not going to be strong. When I got together with the person who's now my wife, we were together, I don't know, maybe 6 months when I got diagnosed. And I said to her, one evening, I'm like, look, you didn't sign up for this. And if you want to bail, I completely understand, no hard feelings. You go walk away. And she's like, there's zero chance that's going to happen. And she didn't. That moment created a bond between us that really strengthened the relationship. And there too, that first diagnosis and prostate cancer, look, it's cancer for many people. It's the first time you hear the words, you have cancer. But in most cases, it's treatable and the survival rates are very, very high. My second go around, the survival rates are different. And I'm one of the lucky ones. The survival rates look very different. But the first one geared us up, and I had an honest conversation and said, look, if you want to bolt, I completely get it. I understand. Like, this is not the journey you signed up for. Um, and so, I think that kind of communication between our male friends, our romantic partners, our life partners, the people in our lives is absolutely critical.
So you mentioned the phallic of how we actually look at it when we were kids, the conquest, the overcoming. And I had to say, my brother was 9 years older than me, and he, him and his friends didn't know any better. They were trying to, like, they instilled on me that sleeping around was actually what it was supposed to be. And now, fast forward, go to the Marine Corps, all of a sudden, still, you think about that type of conquest because you're around the same type of people. And then what I've been learning about from talking to a lot of different veterans in my normal job as a peer specialist, like when you get older, a lot of your views change, but you still have these strong perspectives based on your past and what you know. So you want to keep going back to it. So when they talk about their phallic, where they're actually trying to be able to get it up, to be able to please their wife,
Mhm.
and they're forgetting about the verbal, they're forgetting about the touch, they're forgetting about the other intimacy on so many other levels that really connects them. So I appreciate you sharing that because not enough people actually know that it's not just the bedroom. That's the dessert. You have all 5 courses before you have your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner. But yeah, and then on top of it, being able to talk to your buddies about it, those are some really good friends. It's not like a conversation you want to be able to eat while you're having like coffee or having cake. But I wanted to touch into your book and I wanted to actually hear about what was your favorite chapter? And then after you get done with your favorite chapter, what really inspires you to be able to share part of your achievements, but really showing who you are?
So I'll tell you my favorite chapter and my least favorite chapter because they're one and the same. So the book process took, I don't know, a little bit more than a year, just in terms of writing the rough draft. I started it during chemo and finished it while on safari in South Africa in April. And the beginning came pretty easy. The end came pretty easy. The middle was harder. And the chapter that took me the longest was the one on spirituality. And so it's called Cancer Changes You Spiritually. And it took me, I write fast. It took me an exceedingly long time because I had so many issues to resolve. One of the things that cancer does is it forces you to face your mortality a little bit. It forces you to wrestle with age old questions that, I think as we age, we start to look at a little bit here and there, but we never fully resolve, right? So, what happens when we die? Have I lived the life that I want to live? What do I want my legacy to be? Do I believe in God? Do I believe in a higher power? What do I think lies beyond? Like all of those things, I think we touch on them over the course of our life, but we never fully resolve them. And, I've always had a tricky relationship with the higher power. In fact, some of those same male friends that would told me that they love me would say, I'm praying for you every day. And I think to myself, shit, I'm not even praying for myself. Like maybe I should do this. I don't even know how to do it. And and it felt somewhat opportunistic when I started doing it. I'm like, all right, okay, so you don't pray for 58 years. Now you have cancer and all of a sudden you're praying, right? And so, it felt wrong and it felt uncomfortable. And so I needed to really wrestle with some of those spiritual aspects of things. I mentioned to you that when we're done here today, I'm off to a funeral. And funerals hit differently once you kind of confront this kind of stuff. It's almost like every funeral becomes a dress rehearsal for my own. I'm like, yeah, I hate the carpet here in this funeral home, and the song they picked is weird. I wouldn't pick this song, and who showed up and who didn't, and you start to think about things like that just in a different way. So, it forced me, and I don't know that I came to any grand conclusions in putting the chapter together, um, but it did clarify some things for me. I almost and so the chapter took, I don't know, probably like 2 months, and I'm like, "I write fast, this is crazy. I could just leave this out and be done." And I'm like, "Well, no, that's like skipping mile 18 of the marathon. Right? If you skip mile 18 of the marathon, you can't say you did a marathon if you arrive at 26, right? You hopped in a car and rode for a mile, so you didn't do a marathon. And so, although I thought nobody will know that this chapter even existed, I could just take it out and that's it. I'm like, no, but I'll know, right? And if the book is going to be a complete and thorough and genuine and authentic examination of who I am and what I went through, then I need to include this, even if it's a little bit messy around the edges. And so I did include that chapter that wrestled with some of those issues. I'm sure I'm not the only one that wrestled with those issues. And so, to get to your second question, my hope in writing this would be that somebody who's diagnosed today will just happen across the book and say, all right, here's some tools that I can use to get through. The other thing that I write a lot about the book, and look, 2 million Americans a year hear the words, you have cancer. They all have circles of friends and family that will be impacted. Even those that make it to the other side, right? They say to all of us, there's no evidence of disease. They don't use the term remission anymore. you know, Cancer leaves behind plenty of evidence. So do the treatments. And I'll never forget, at the end of treatment, you ring the bell. I had some very, very mixed emotions about ringing a celebratory bell in the middle of an infusion room where half those people aren't going to have the same outcome I did. And so I felt pretty guilty ringing the bell at the end. But what they don't tell you, or at least I didn't hear it, is well, things actually get harder once you ring the bell because treatment is, especially chemo, is cumulative in nature. And so the first few chemo treatments, you feel okay. You're like, what does everybody complain about? This isn't bad. By the time you're done, it's rough. And 3 months out, it actually hits, both barrels and you have a rougher time. Meanwhile, everybody's like, oh, you rang the bell, you're done, you moved on with life. And you don't move on with life. Every time, I go back for scans and I go back every 3 months. It's like you spin the roulette wheel. You land on red, you're good. You land on black, you're right back to cancer land. And I'm, off my bike, out of my, running outfit, and dancing with an IV pole and an open back gown in an infusion room somewhere. And so that scanxiety, persists for an extended period of time. I don't think it will ever go away. And I will say, as uncomfortable as it is, and it throws you into a spin every time you have to go because you go to the same place for the same tests and you wait for the results. It also reminds you, look, nothing's guaranteed, and make every take every moment you can because you don't know how many more there are. I often liken it to, we all have a countdown clock that follows us around like a halo, and you don't know when that countdown clock goes off. When does it end? How many days do you have left? How many? It's pretty sobering to think we all have about 79 summers in us. And so, we have that countdown clock that's continually ticking. Make every moment count. And that's kind of why I named the book Every Mile Matters. It's like every step of your journey, is part of the bigger picture, whether we're talking about endurance sports and exercise, or the journey of life. And if every mile doesn't matter to you, you should find a way to make them matter because we never know how many more we've got in us.
Did you ever, by any chance, read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
I've read excerpts somewhere. It's been many years since I've read the entire thing, and so you probably heard some overtones of that in my discussion.
Or Yalom's book, Man Staring into the Sun?
That one I'm not familiar with.
So you probably have heard Irving Yalom, like the grandfather of group therapy, but he also talks more into the existential psychology about like the ending of a person's life, or the end of it. But there was also something that you said too, where like after you ring the bell, like the ringing the bell could be very inspirational for the other people. Hey, we might be able to ring the bell. But the other thing is just you ring that bell, you don't have that same type of support and community that you're showing up. Hey, I'm not going to see Tom and Frank every day here, even though we're puking together, but I see Tom all the time. And I know that Tom is here, and I actually wonder if Mary, his wife, is going to show up. I'm just using random names.
Yeah, yeah,
And like now all of a sudden this support system I have and all this time that I filled up, and you start looking at like, did I actually choose the right path in my life? Did I actually move forward in the right way? Am I going to have the immortality complex that I really want? Am I going to be able to leave this so-called legacy? Am I going to be able to make sure that I care? And now, what am I willing to change of my patterns, my behaviors to be able to be that person I want? And should I chose that sooner? And you mentioned about God and praying. I'm so glad that you did not take that chapter out. I'm actually really looking forward to buying this book and reading your book because we're struggling. Some of us struggle, and we have people praying for us. Am I only praying because I'm sick? And thank you, God, for actually helping me out right now. Or maybe this is just one last ditch effort. Do I really believe in this? How do I pray? That's such a humbling response right there. Like somebody that's a Christian or whatever, they'll tell you this is how you pray. And by being like vulnerable and actually just being able to be that self, you're like, wow, I didn't think about this. This is awesome. I can actually have the chance and opportunity to grow. But just curiosity, how was your relationship with your family, with your wife and your son after that? Because how,
yeah.
like, go ahead.
So I do talk about kind of the conversations with my kids about this, and that kind of thing. I think, I've got two younger ones and an older one. I think they always, whenever I go for scans and say, oh, I got to go to a doctor's appointment, I don't get into detail. They're like, all right, everything's still good, right? I'm like, yes, everything is still good. And so there's always that little reluctance, but, it does, for me, just, back on the legacy thing and the relationship thing, my question always was, what do I want my life to look like? And, the diagnosis kind of pivoted me to what has my life been like, right? It kind of moved from, future tense to, more immediate to say, what kind of life have I lived in? And do I need to do course corrections now, for whatever reason? I didn't have to make a lot of course corrections, but I will say, it deepened my relationships, with so many people. It created a lot of new relationships. Look, there are people who write books and give speeches about how cancer was a gift. I'm not in that camp. Cancer is not a gift. It's a miserable, relentless disease. But there are gifts that you can take from it. The same way, you could take gifts from any tragedy. It's the same kind of thing. I hesitate to say it's what you make it, but there's a part of me that believes, how you walk this road matters, and the attitude that you carry with you makes a difference. One of the things we know about cancer and mental health, and it's the ultimate problem, is that, stress is not good for our bodies in so many ways, and there's a fair amount of science that says stress can actually fuel cancer and other diseases in our body, right? The mind and body connection. Cancer, navigating cancer is the most stressful thing that can happen. And so I'm like, so wait a minute, stress causes cancer and cancer causes stress. How do I get off this treadmill? And so, it's in how you process things. It's in how you think about things. I never, and there are people I know who say, I came to peace with I found a space, in a peaceful space, in this notion that I may not get better and this may be it. I never came to that, because I'm always like, no, I'm going to fight this. When my oncologist said, look, we're 8 infusions in, I told you kind of that sweet spot was 6, your blood counts are dropping, it's taking its toll, your side effects are mounting up. Maybe we should cut this short. He looked at me, I said nothing. He paused for a second. He's like, but I know you're never going to do that. And I'm like, there is zero chance I'm stopping before we're done with the 8 treatments. If I have to go find a way to buy chemo on the street because you won't give it to me, that's what I'm going to do. And he's like, yeah, I kind of knew that about you. And so once I set out and said, no, we're doing the 8 treatments. You've told me this is the gold standard. This is what we're doing. There was no quitting, but I would say I never fully and haven't fully wrestled completely with the notion of mortality, because there were points in this process where I understood I could die, right? It said it in my medical chart, patient has been counseled about the possibility of mortality. And when you see that in black and white, it's like, yeah, okay, this is serious. Um, but I didn't think as I went through this, like I could, like I'm going to die through all of this. I will say now I've lost, three friends to cancer, two on the same day. And we had parallel journeys. One was diagnosed before me with the same cancer, one diagnosed after me with a different cancer. Um, and then someone else who had lived with this for an extended period of time. When people around you begin to pass away of the same disease, you're like, oh, well, that could be me. It doesn't create fear in me so much as it creates gratitude.
Yeah. It's my dad. I lost my dad 2020 to cancer, and I lost four of his siblings to cancer, all different types. It's a gnarly death. And I really appreciate the mortality and the way that you're able to break it down and the difference of emotions. It really gave me more insight about how my family members were thinking. And also about just being a support system to be able to help support them while they were on that journey and not fully understanding what was going on through their head. You just gave me a little peek behind the window, and I really appreciate it. You don't always hear it. Sometimes you see it, but you don't always know how to articulate it. And the final question I have for you is, what is the message that you would like to share to the world?
Yeah. So the practical message is I had two cancers in 2 years. I had zero symptoms either time, zero symptoms. I thought I was going for well checkups. Get screened, get checked up, get checked on. As men, we put off our medical appointments. We put off prostate exams because it's uncomfortable and yucky. We don't do the colonoscopies because we hate the prep. You want to see yucky and inconvenient, wind up with a cancer diagnosis. I went to more than 100 doctor's appointments in 6 months. You want to see yucky and inconvenient, wind up with a case of cancer that is late stage. And so the pragmatic advice is go get checked. I'd say the more ideological advice is, understand that our time here is limited. Find a way to connect with other people each and every day. Look for those relationships with your male peers. Hug your kids a little bit tighter. um, I think also, um, beyond that, mindfulness and presence goes a long way. So many of us, including myself, and it happens to me sometimes even now. We skip through life. We check off days on the calendar. The weeks fly by. The seasons fly by. How many people have said to you recently, "I can't believe how fast summer went. Now we're into fall." Um, you know, take time and really appreciate those moments. They matter more than you know. And at the end of it all, those are the things that are going to matter. It's not how many followers you have on social media. It's not going to be how many likes you got on Facebook. Um, it's not going to be how many hours you spent at work. The people at work don't care that much about you. It's going to be that time with friends and families and the depth of your connections. That's how people are going to remember you. And those are the moments that we're all going to treasure when, our time is up.
Thank you, Jeff. I really do appreciate it, and thank you for making this time happen with all. And hopefully, you give yourself some grace today when you go into the funeral.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks for your work in the mental health space with veterans. I'm sure our paths will cross again.
I hope so. Have a good one, sir.
You too. Take care.